take another little piece of my heart.
Folks, welcome inside the Paris Sea Palace, high above 3733 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk, and thank you so much for making us part of your day today. We already had a cosmic conversation with the great Hindu chanter Krishna Das, and things are only going to get more interesting now as we talk to a cat who's one of the most articulate in terms of being able to describe the fusing of folk music with improvisation and how that catapulted the entire San Francisco counterculture, as he likes to call it, how it continued in his career all the way through being an advocate as a public defender, and today as he resides in Paris, France, which we will certainly vet. Barry Melton, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, thank you so much, Jake. I'm sorry for our technological difficulties.
Well,
that happens.
I mean, it does happen. And can you talk, just starting on that, I mean, do you remember a time early in your career when you were a little bit more, I don't know if you were ever really uptight about it, but when you were on stage and having serious sonic issues, and how you, like with Country Joe, or and how you guys ultimately just said, fuck it, let's just go and let's just do what we have to do.
I know you won't believe it, but it still happens.
Oh, I know it. You know, I know. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes the tech gods are not with you, and you have to resist forcefully and break through if you possibly can. So,
well, I mean,
it's not the case that it always works the way you want it to.
Right. And when you were dealing with that, I just want to ask you, we talked off air about you now living in Paris, and you said it was something that it was on your bucket list, your checklist, that you've always wanted to do. But why did you choose this time right now in the Fish's career to go to Paris?
I have no idea.
That's exactly the right answer.
I'd like to tell you that it's all in reaction to the political climate in the United States, but that would be a load of whatever it is.
Interesting.
I didn't expect Trump to win the presidency, and so this is not in reaction to that. I had a plan. Well, it's always been part of my general plan. The impediment was convincing my wife to go along with it. So that finally happened. Marriage is sort of a democracy in miniature, as is mine. So I finally convinced her that we could spend 6 months in Paris, and she went along with it.
I just want to be clear, though. I mean,
here we are.
I just want to, like, you actually, I mean, you had, last time I talked to you, you gave an inspiring riff on the advocacy of your public defender's office and the amount of people that you oversaw, and you were proud of that. And have you, like, officially cut away from that, or are you going to resume that after, if you do return to the United States, assuming they're, that you want to come back?
Hey, I don't do anything official in my life.
I
but
love
aside from that, I mean, at least for right now, I'm a musician and lives in Paris. And I have a tour planned of the United Kingdom next month. I played a few gigs here in Paris. We've gone up to Greece. I just got back from Normandy. I've been in the Czech Republic and sort of fooling around over here. I'm having a great time, and I have no rational explanation for what I'm doing.
Well, but that's good because that's often when the greatest spontaneous creations occur. You lived over. I'm trying to remember. You've spent time overseas before. How have you cultivated the gigs? I mean, is there a huge fish following over there? How did you get into the touring circuit in Europe?
Well, I was a British recording artist at a point in my career in the early 70s. I was recording out of Wales with British musicians. I had something of a following there and toured. And so I'm not unknown to the British audience. I'm less known to the French audience, but I've worked here fairly constantly in one way or another since, for the last 15 years, maybe I've been coming here once or twice a year. I don't know if I sent you a copy, but I did an album that's bilingual in both French and English with a bunch of French musicians, and particularly a really fine guitar player by the name of Stefan Misry. And so here I am. I'm doing what I should be doing. I feel like I'm doing what I should be doing.
No, it's talking to Barry Melton here live on the Jake Feinberg Show on Power Talk. You have a very great way of taking seemingly complex things and then talking about them and making them somewhat simplistic, or making them simple to the layperson, which is probably why you were a good lawyer as well. But I'm just curious, like in the parallel, like I dug up our first interview and I was, taking out these excerpts because it was an hour and 16 minutes and a lot of these stories hadn't seen the light of day. And I wanted when you were talking about this fusing of so beautiful, this idea of folk music with psychedelics and then improvising in that folk music. So there was a tangent of jazz there. I know you're also an art buff, like a visual art guy. Were there artists during that time, either in Europe or the States, that were inspiring to you, that were doing things? I don't want to say you guys weren't playing avant-garde free music, okay, but in the sense of the improvisatory, was there something parallel to that in the painting world?
Well, during the 60s, I lived for a considerable period of time at the Chelsea Hotel, which was inhabited at that time by Andy Warhol.
Unbelievable.
And there were a lot of artists that lived at the Chelsea. And, of course, there were a lot of musicians who I didn't take notice of. I feel bad about that. Patti Smith was kind enough to put us in her biography. And I suppose Lou Reed was about at that time, but, we were stars, right? So we didn't notice, people who weren't part of our touring circuit. But they were around, and certainly I was conscious of the visual work that they were doing. Warhol was doing movies and stuff like that as well. So yeah, we were there.
Were there like parallel? I was talking to. I went out to L.A. on a recent business trip to do some work, and I wound up talking to the drummer in Dugu, Chancellor, and he was talking about playing with Alice Coltrane for a set, and then the following set was Sun Ra. So you had like the spiritual component of Afro jazz, and then you had sort of this clear. I mean, Sun Ra was maybe the only cat that ever really went to has gone to another portal sonically, but that was more entertainment. I mean, I know that Joey Spring, the album Joe Pass album was cut at a movie theater, and they had like, all sorts of, light shows and art going on. I mean, did you play gigs with guys who were doing other forms of multimedia art, not necessarily Warhol, but, that in that vein, was there multimedia, yeah.
I can't prove it's true, but I believe we brought the first light show to New York City.
Okay, let's break it down. This is, the truth
yeah.
is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I believe we brought the first light show to New York City. It was the Joshua Light Show. They ended up staying and working the Fillmore East. So some part of, and I've said this before, and I'll tell you for your listeners, that music has come and gone over the years, but the thing that makes the 60s unique is the light show. The light show was something that nobody had ever seen before. Nobody had ever seen visuals like that with music. There had never been the overall insistence that we brought to the musical medium, that we not only had posters that commemorated each of our dates, but we had a light show. And the light show got, I think, it could never really transfer into pop culture as easily as the music could, because there was already an existing structure for recordings of music to sell over the counter, but they never really developed one for the light show.
That's so fascinating.
But, yeah, I mean, the light show was, at the apex of whatever 60s culture was, the light show was like being in this giant room or something like that, I mean, it created an environment where not only was the band enveloped in light, but so was the audience. And it was a living, breathing medium that sometimes had several different things going on at the same time. I mean, they had liquid gels that were pulsating. They had movies that were running. I mean, it was a really visual experience. The 60s was a visual experience of music and light. And unfortunately, as the bands garnered more of the audience and became more well known, they started to bring in conventional lighting like spotlights, which basically destroyed the artistic.
Right, and then I mean, can you explain what that looked like, or what those sort of tapestries might have looked like in comparison to when they just became more garden variety spotlights?
Well, I mean, it was a visual experience. It was liquid lights. It was movies, but we brought it into the Cafe A Go-Go, which was not truly a conducive environment in the way that the Fillmore or the Avalon were. I mean, it was something else entirely. It was smaller scale, but at least we brought it there. And of course, by the time Bill Graham ensconced himself in New York at the Fillmore East, then there was a regular light show in New York. That were the guys that we had brought there originally. So
it's interesting. No, you just sparked my memory here because I wanted to ask you about a cat. I saw a picture of the two of you. He's left us now, but when did you first cross paths with Richard Treese?
Oh, Richard.
Dude, I mean, heavy. I mean, and I've been talking to Healy a bunch off air, and Healy was talking about Treese and this guy Giannini, this drummer coming out of the Oakland funk scene. And I'm like, Melton was you had your tentacles everywhere. You know, so I mean, if you could talk, how did you connect with Richard originally? Talk a little bit about that cat.
Well, Richard is maybe one of the eminent psychedelic guitar players of England, and he was a member of a band named Help Yourself, which was an early. Help Yourself. And in fact, David Charles, who was the producer of my first United Artists solo record for United Artists of England in the early 70s, David had been the drummer with Help Yourself, and Richard was the guitar player. And the bass player on those sessions was a guy named Ken Whaley, who was just a magnificent player and a wonderful musician. I played with Richard, and Richard, it seems to me he's been passed away now for 2 or 3 years.
Yes, he left us. Yes,
and and I played with Richard for maybe the last 10 years before that with a band called the Green Ray. That was really the inspiration more than anyone of Ken Whaley, who was the bass player on my early sessions. And Ken and I played together for over 40 years when I was in England. So, and Richard, I just love playing with Richard. That was like, it's an experience that I can only tell you was similar to the experience of playing with John Cipollina for years. Richard was a great player, just a great player, a great sensitive musician and an inspiration to a lot of people, including me.
I was going to ask you also Freiberg chimed in on that forum today. I would like you to talk, if possible, about Cipollina specifically, because he was truly playing. You said you sort of equated it to surf music, but you said he stood alone or separately from. Listen, you can talk about Gary Duncan and Elmore. I interviewed Greg Elmore. I look at that. They were a rhythm section. I think Cipollina was the front man for Quicksilver. Freiberg was in there as well. You talked about Country Joe, yourself, and you mentioned other people who were straight out of the folk, the Byrds as well. What was Cipollina's legacy to the San Francisco sound? Was he ahead of? Was he the first rock guitar player there?
He may have been. He may have been the only one. To the sense that really, take the drugs out of the labeling of the music, and what you have is you have folk rock. I think, honestly, for the most part, being the representative music of San Francisco. Now, when it begins to meld into the jazz form, people call that psychedelic rock, I guess.
Right.
But it's really, musicologically speaking, there's no such thing as psychedelic rock. There's folk music that kind of gets melded into rock music, and it's called folk rock. The Byrds were folk rock. The Byrds, who else electrified Pete Seeger and made him a household name? You know?
That's right.
You know, it's like, I mean, it's folk rock that we're talking about for the most part. John was really a rocker. I mean, John was pals with me. John could play surf hits. You know, the folk rock or the surf music thing is just, that was a kind of rock and roll that existed before, you know, our San Francisco rock form existed. So I guess I was, you know, and John could play that. John could play a lot of things. But he was not a folk musician. He knew so many folk musicians, so he knew how to play that too, but it wasn't his interest. And I think, you know, I mean, I think John was in a unique place. I was talking to somebody about John the other day, and I was saying that he never played anything the same way twice.
Was it the same way twice? The same way twice or the same way once?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, Jake. Exactly my thought.
I mean,
Yeah.
no, but and just to be clear, that was a drummer who plays, a very prolific jam band drummer, Tony Leone, told me that originally he told me that was Phil Lesh's comment, that he never played the Dead never played the same song twice, but then he corrected it by saying, actually, he said they never played the same song once. I don't want to pretend that I took that term, but go ahead. Cipollina was just like that, and I love that. That to me is the psychedelic experience, actually, more than
You never knew what he was going to break into a song with.
right,
You know?
right.
And it was an unpredictable experience, and that's what made it so marvelous. And because he had that gift of being able to take a new approach each time, it made everyone else do the same thing. Okay, John, is that where we're going tonight? You know? And you had no choice but to either go on for the ride or get off the train, you know? And nobody got off the train. So John was a unique player.
Well, let me ask you a question to follow this up. This is from his brother Mario. He said that John had the first tri-amp guitar setup where you dedicated set of amps and speakers for each frequency range. For the low frequencies, he had two Standell Imperials, which were at the time extremely powerful. He had four 15-inch speakers and probably 800 watts for the low frequencies. He had a twin reverb on top of that with 12-inch speakers. That put out a couple hundred watts, and that was for his mid-range. For the high frequency, he had dual Schulman amplifier at the top, which is just the amp without speakers. It was hot-rodded by Dan Healy and added another couple hundred watts. That powered 6 Wurlitzer high-frequency drivers with trombone bells attached to them. They looked like trumpet bells, but actually they were trombone bells. He had the first pedal board. So I mean, that made him, he had the first real rig.
Well, I don't know if it was the first. Just like I said, I don't know. You know, I mean, I don't know if we brought the first light show to New York City,
right.
But I do know that John was an innovator, and that he had a fresh approach on every song. And you played it on Tuesday night, and there was no guarantee on Wednesday night that he would come in the same way or do the same thing. I mean, he generally didn't. John loved to make it new, and always did, and that was an incredible contribution to any band. And I love playing with him. So,
you talk about like, did you play with Bloomfield ever?
Yeah, sure. We worked together. He produced my album on Columbia.
Really?
And
Wow.
yeah, and we have a duet on the album where he plays just like Django Reinhardt.
What year
I mean,
what year was that out? What year was that album come out?
1972, 73.
It's just a mercurial fish. So wait, because here my larger question is this: as best you can, um, putting the drugs aside, again, not easy to do. I look at Bloomfield and Cipollina, and I'm trying to figure out, because they were such innovators and they were always. I talked to Barry Goldberg and he was like, John. Bloomfield would show up to a gig. He'd just rather show up in a bathrobe and his guitar. He was not into this. He just wanted to play music, and these guys seemed they seemed to get eaten up by where the direction of music headed, and the dinosaurs that especially with Cipollina there, they both left us very quickly, and I know they got consumed with addictions and things like that, but what was it about the trajectory of the music?
By the way, I knew them both well.
Yeah.
I knew them both around the time that they passed away, and neither of them were drug addicts. And I didn't say that neither of them did drugs. That would be a canard of immense proportion.
Yes.
But they were not addicts.
Okay, so that makes it even better. Tell me about. They seemed to, in my mind, it was what was happening in the music scene that was depressing for them. If so, to me, it seemed like things changed so much from the Mill Valley Gang. Obviously, it did. The Heliport, the Mill Valley Gang, all the other stuff that was going on, and then after a while, it was just like it became a different time, and they didn't. It just seemed to eat them up. I just wanted to get your impression, knowing that you knew them at the end of their lives, and they weren't drug addicts at the end of their lives, but they seemed to be at odds with the direction of where the music industry was going.
Yeah, for a while there, whatever we did was big time and made a lot of money. And then the field got, I guess you could say the field got crowded, and it's like there wasn't a space for either of them. John, and this is true of a lot of people, by the way. It's not just these guys. I saw Charlie Mingus at the end of his career, and he was stone cold broke. He was playing in San Francisco at the Bothand on Divisadero Street, and I was in the audience with maybe a dozen people,
Wow.
a dozen people, to see one of America's great geniuses, playing this club in San Francisco and nobody coming to see him. It was a heartbreaker, Why does that happen? I don't know why that happens. One of the things that scared me most about the music business, have you ever seen Ralph Gleason's movie about Duke Ellington?
Oh, I'm obsessed with Ralph Gleason, but no, I have not seen that film.
Well, it's a statement in and of itself. Here's Duke Ellington driving around. He's riding shotgun for his sax player, who's, and he's got this huge band on stage, and maybe half the gigs the band outnumbers the audience. It's like time has passed him by, and he's got these incredible, these legendary bags under his eyes where he looks so world weary, and there are constantly shots in the movie of him in a dressing room with a towel over his head and sort of a big light bulb in the dressing room,
Mm-hmm.
And you go, is this what America does to its geniuses? Does it make them you know, go out on the road with financially unsustainable operations and work until they die? Is this how it works? You know, it's a heartbreaker.
I mean, I want to go deep. I want to go deeper on this because I wanted to lay this back to Cipollina and Bloomfield. Is that like Mingus called his music Mingus music. Okay, so you had Duke Ellington called it music. It was either good or bad. That was subjective. But to me, it speaks. You talk about Mingus and nobody in the crowd. He was playing authentic music that he believed in deeply, and he was stone cold broke. So I'm trying to figure out if you're trying to basically make a case that the industry, the record companies were saying to cats like John and Bloomfield and other people as well, hey, make stuff that's going to be commercially viable so you can make the dough, man. You don't worry about what's in your soul. Just worry about the dough. And those guys were like, I've already been through that crap, and I just want to make music that feels good. And yet they felt like they were, is there validity to that? I mean, that's what America seems to be about. It doesn't matter if there's any depth to it or if it really is what the artist is about. It's about making a pop hit or creating some pop hit in 15 seconds that's going to sell all these records. That's what seemed to eat those guys alive.
None of those guys had a commercial sense. They did what they wanted to do, and they weren't ruled by money. And their musical decisions were not financial decisions. They were musical decisions. And that's the difference. And so, in a way, they got punished for it. Because in order to keep the people packed in the house, you need to be, there are so many different parts of that wheel that keeps it rolling. It's a management issue. But I'll tell you, all of those guys played the music they wanted to play. See Ralph Gleason's movie of Duke Ellington. It's just it'll break your heart.
Well, I mean, did Gleason give coverage to Country Joe and the Fish? Because, I mean, he was a syndicated columnist, and if you got in with him, you were well known everywhere.
Yeah, no, Ralph was fine, and in later years, he worked at Fantasy Records. He was like a consultant. We recorded a reunion album for Fantasy. I mean, Ralph was fine. It's not that. It's what happens is, I think there's a time when your music is when you're no longer 20 and really cute, and you're not, you have the choice to go on and be an adult musician and play like a man, or you can stay a kid. I mean, there are people who've successfully stayed childlike for their entire careers. I'm not going to single anyone out.
No,
but
it's fine.
But there's like a time where your music can grow up or not. And for whatever reason, I think all of those people we've talked about, Charlie Mingus, Duke Ellington, John Cipollina, Mike Bloomfield, had a tough time in the adult world playing music, and they didn't bend to commercialism, and they were, all of them, magnificently creative people who somehow didn't fit into the commercial world, the industrial / commercial world of music, which is, the music business. I mean, not everybody fits in the music business, It requires a lot of compromise that not everyone's willing to make. So, it's okay.
Have you You've compromised, you feel? Like, I mean, what I'm saying is, can you have it both ways, or is it just sort of like,
Well, you can be happy, not. I mean, if you're willing to live hand to mouth, and I've certainly known a lot of musicians who have lived hand to mouth, and by that I mean, if you're willing to eschew commercial success and live within your means, you can go on forever, you know? And I assume that's the way the old blues guys did it. I mean, they never hit a home run, so to speak. Actually, some of them did fairly well as elder statesmen when the folk music revival happened, you know? So a lot of my friends who I followed around as a young guitar player, guys like Mance Lipscomb and Booker White and Fred McDowell, who were on the folk circuit, Sam Hopkins, you know, those guys actually saw success as they got older that they never experienced when they were younger. And they lived, you know, Sam Hopkins, it used to be you could walk in any record store anywhere in Europe and find 10 different Lightning Hopkins records, you know? And the deal is somebody would show up with $100 and a pint of whiskey, and at the end of the gig, he'd go to wherever the living room was and record him an album. You know? So he not only made money from whoever showed up at the gig, but he made like a $100 bonus and was able to get loaded at the end of the gig by recording an album. So you'd see his albums like, you know, there must be, I don't know. I mean, I don't know who puts them out anymore, but you used to be able to find maybe 300 or 400 different Sam Hopkins records around, you know?
So I missed that. He would get a whiskey and what? Well, he would get some alcohol, and what else would he get?
He'd get a pint of whiskey and $100.
Oh, so he did. He got paid. Yeah, no, because I was going to say the cats like Grant Green on the East Coast. I mean, once business people, once the record executives knew that he was hooked up on smack, they'd have him come in and cut these brilliant albums and just pay him off in drugs. You know, so it was like that also went down as well.
Yeah, these were, for the most part, fans or people who wanted to put out records, and he'd make records, you know? I mean, you want a record, you go see Sam Hopkins, you give him $100, buy him a pint of alcohol, give him a little food, and you had a record.
Oh, that's great.
You know?
Well, I mean, this is what I wanted to, I needed to ask you about, the Fatdella bass. Did you used to hang with Jesse Fuller? He would play at a shoot.
I did.
Tell me about that.
Jesse was a friend of mine. He was an East Bay guy. I remember when he first came back from Europe, he bought a station wagon that fit his Fatdella in it, and he'd regale me with stories of his European tour where they carried him out on their shoulders, and you know, he had a wonderful experience thanks to the Rooftop Singers of becoming fairly renowned in his old age, and you know, it was all due to the San Francisco Bay Blues becoming kind of a folk hit, and Jesse was just a wonderful man, a wonderful guy, a great inspiration. And, you know, I was thrilled to drive him around. I mean, you know, that's what when I was young, I was such a folk purist, I didn't believe it was legitimate to learn music off a record, that you had to learn it in the oral tradition from the guy who played that way.
I love
So, of course, I followed Jesse around, you know. I mean, it was a folk thing to do, you know.
Well, I mean, can you talk about a point when that purity, like when the Fish realized that you were just way too deep in the weeds from a pure? Do you remember the first time you felt like you sinned as a folk musician? Or what are, or maybe this, maybe
Oh, yeah.
what
Now,
maybe this is the better question is what are the
Are
even
you wearing your collar?
no, what I'm saying is that maybe you can just
Must
talk
I
about
confess?
yeah, confessional. This is confessional. But if you could also give, like, in your mind, looking back as an elder statesman now, maybe the top 5 sins that if, because there's a lot of kids peeps, younger cats that are searching everywhere and busking and searching. What are the greatest sins that a folk music could possibly do at this point in your mind as well?
Well, I mean, there were people who really stuck with it and then made the transition and did it late. But, I mean, basically speaking, we didn't play electric guitars. That was like selling out or something. It was not something you did. So I don't think there was a day in particular that I could single out, but at some point in time, I became an electric guitar player, not an acoustic guitar player. And I watched friends who I had who viewed playing electric guitar as kind of selling out, who would give me disparaging looks and say, "Barry, I mean, and I had some sense of residual guilt, I suppose. But I was having too much fun, and then of course there were all the girls and stuff like that. I mean, folk music never drew them like a magnet the way rock music did,
There was also something about the fusing of psychedelics and electric guitars. That to me seems like also would have been something where it would have taken the music to a new perch.
Yeah, and yes, and then there were people who were doing exciting things just with amplification.
Right.
I remember playing with a band called Red Crayola. They were from Texas, I think.
Oh, man.
And basically, they sort of came on stage, turned up really loud, and faced their guitar players into their amplifiers, which caused a tremendous amount of feedback. And then they sort of played with the feedback for an hour.
Well, that must.
And they didn't really play. They didn't play with the guitars. They played with the feedback. But it was incredibly creative. I mean, it was like, it kind of blew your brain, especially if you were, loaded on some psychedelics. I mean, here's this band. They come out. They don't even play the things. They create feedback, giant amounts of feedback, and they were very exciting.
I just would, I've talked to a couple of cats. Talked about Pete Seeger having family picnics up in the Peekskill area and then being ambushed by the Ku Klux Klan. I've had Mike Knock, the piano player, talking about being with Yusef Lateef in the middle of Colorado in the 60s and being run out of the town by white nationalists. Can you talk about your experiences with the Klan?
Well, I'm too young to remember it, but I was at Peekskill when the Klan drove my parents and I out of Peekskill at that concert with
1952. 1952.
No, it was earlier than that, I think. But
wow, you were there. What? Please. So what?
Yeah.
What? I mean,
Yeah,
what? Yeah, go ahead.
My parents were on the left wing, man, and my dad was a friend of Paul Robeson's. In fact, my dad was part of the human bodyguard that protected Paul Robeson at the Peekskill concert when they went back for the second time. They were driven out by the Klan the first time in New York, in Westchester County, right? It was the Klan.
The Peekskill Klan was so. I want to be clear because the bus drivers disappeared, the cops left, And the first time the bus left, and all the windows and the windshield were all smashed out. And you're saying,
Right.
and that was, and Robeson was due to perform there, and then when he came back the second time, your dad was a human wall, part of the.
Yeah, my dad and Paul were friends. I met Paul Robeson. In fact, I celebrated my 10th birthday at a Paul Robeson concert.
Oh, that is awesome.
My dad and Paul were friends. We were neighbors with Woody Guthrie and his family. I went to Marge Guthrie's dance school as a kid. Marjorie Guthrie.
Oh my gosh.
I'm a child of the West. I think that the polite term is red diaper baby, but take it for what it's worth.
So, how did it shape your view? Well, I guess, the Klan hasn't gone anywhere. It's still.
You understand that? I think I told you this before, but don't let me run on and repeat myself. But my parents wanted me to be a guitar player. I'm the guy who decided to be a lawyer. You understand that, right?
No, I don't think you told me that.
Well, that's the facts. My parents raised me to be a left-wing guitar player. My father was hopeful that I would sing at union halls and protests, and that's where my parents were at. They were radicals, 30s radicals living into the 50s and 60s.
Can you explain? Can you explain to the audience why your dad wanted you to do that?
Why he wanted me to do it? Well, he thought I could make a living. I started playing guitar when I was 5 years old, which was quite some time ago at this point.
Yeah, definitely.
And I started playing guitar when I was 5, and they were hopeful that my mother played the piano and sang. We lived in a small left-wing community in Brighton Beach, New York. I remember Jack Elliott from my childhood. I think my mom gave him his first job at the Brighton Beach PTA. We were, I don't know, several hundred, several thousand, quite left-wing people. And this is before McCarthy. In the 50s. We were in a small left-wing community. I remember when we moved to the West Coast, Trudy Ash moved in next door, who was Mo Ash's daughter. Mo, of course, ran Folkways Records. This was a small community of people who all knew each other, My dad shipped with Cisco Houston, who is in the Merchant Marine. So was Woody. My dad knew all those folks. They were friends. This is,
But doesn't it speak also to the fact that, especially because they were Depression era peeps, cats, that music, the significance of music in our culture had a totally different meaning, in the sense that you had the ability to inspire those, to help them wash away the dust of everyday life. Musicians have never, unless you become a star, it was never about making millions of dollars. Didn't it have something to do with inspiring peeps that were, because music had a totally different cultural significance than it does today?
Not totally, but largely. For people on the left, music was part of the rallying cause. It's always been that. During the 60s, when we played at protests, we were the drawing card for people who had important things to say,
Absolutely.
So we were, I suppose we were used, and it was fine with us if we were used, because we understood that people would come to see the music. The so-called we were the top bill at the Democratic convention, at the alternate convention that was supposed to take place in Lincoln Park in Chicago. There was actually a musical bill. We were Country Joe and the Fish were top bill. Chicago. We were the drawing card for the Chicago riots.
This is 68 you're talking about.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I think that it's funny because I think that spiritual component of music, the messages within the music, is what's missing in so many of these sort of offshoot, groups on the left that are trying to rally now. There is no musical component to it. In fact, you had policemen cracking heads and things like that. But you had. I'm sure you played Black Panther movements back in Oakland.
Of course we did.
Of course you did. Of course, the musical. Yeah. What I'm saying is the significance, because music, like we go back to the Bloomfield and Cipollina thing, because it's moved into this sort of formulaic, and basically music is made for pacification now, as opposed to burning. Okay, as opposed to collective consciousness. It is sorely lacking in these social movements now. So whether or not you were being used or not, they knew you were a vital, whoever was putting those things together, knew you were a vital cog towards collective consciousness and to inspire people.
I say this very proudly,
yeah,
that the progressive tradition in music it's part of music. It's part of what's going on in music. My friend Banana,
yeah,
who I've been playing with for the last 15 years, just went to work in Stevie Van Zandt's Disciples of Soul band.
Sure.
And so he drugged me out to Stevie Van Zandt when he played here in Paris. And Stevie Van Zandt is a very political guy. He wrote a magnificent song about Leonard Peltier. He's right out there politically. Elvis Costello. The number of contemporary musicians who are politically active is phenomenal. And they're almost all progressive. You don't see a lot of. Other than what's his name, Ted Nugent, you don't see a whole lot of musicians on the right.
Well, I did a cosmic. And Nugent, by the way, was you setting aside his political bent. He was in Detroit checking out Sun Ra and Yusuf Lateef back in the day. So for what it's worth, which was pretty cool to know. But yeah, I think that communally, the enclaves are few and far between now, which makes it harder to coalesce in a collective way. You were right in the San Francisco scene. Before that, you were playing the Ash Grove with Taj and Lester Chambers. There were all sorts of places where you were seeing each other all the time. The studio scene, especially on the East Coast, all the time. Randy Brecker was saying it. The music came out of the communities. And now you're working, so it's a different vibe. Van Zandt comes to Paris, totally chill. Maybe it's a 1 or 2 night gig, and they're off to the next city. So there's to try to plant those seeds. You can't just keep planting a seed and then planting another seed and then planting another seed, and then it has to germinate. And we live in this time now of immediate, instantaneous information, and it's created this inability, and it goes across the way in music. In music today, you get 15, 20 seconds to make your pitch. If you don't do it, you're gone. Okay, and all the cats that were coming, you said it in our last interview, Country Joe's first album was not a professional album, but the label believed and understood in you guys and allowed you to cultivate your sound so that after a while you got some momentum. Same with Bruce Springsteen, same with all these other cats. They didn't have top 10 hits right off the bat. James Taylor. So those are the conundrums that my generation as a Gen Xer and millennials are really, really up against. And so it's, I guess what I'm trying to say to you is these gigs now, have you, as an adult musician, how does Barry Melton look different aside from just the actual physical aging component of it, how have you changed from being a kid musician to an adult musician now as you play across the European continent?
Well, I don't. First of all, the physical part is an interesting component because I don't move around a whole lot.
Yeah, right.
You know? I mean, I used to be. I mean, literally, my performance was an athletic event.
I believe it, man. The pictures of
else.
you were out of I'm sure you were out of control. Just a whirling dervish.
Yeah, I mean, so of course I don't do that anymore. It's much more of an intellectual exercise than a physical exercise. But I don't worry about it anymore. I play the same way if there's 20 people or if there's 2,000 people or if there's 20,000 people. I just get up there and I do my thing and I do what I want to do. I try to incorporate whatever else is going on there. If I'm playing with other people, then it becomes something of a social interaction for me. And if it's just myself, then it's an interaction between me and the audience. You're always playing with somebody. The audience is the other player, if no one else. I mean, you get them to sing, you get them to do stuff, you get them to participate. That's performance. Whereas if you go up there with a band, you're interacting with the other people in the band and not as much with the audience, So, what has changed most dramatically is undoubtedly I'm not as concerned with pleasing people anymore as I used to be.
I'm sorry, you cut out. You cut out there. What did you say? I'm not so much what?
Concerned with pleasing the audience.
I did.
As I am.
Oh yeah, you've become Lee Morgan. You've become Lee Morgan. You've become Lee Morgan and Miles Davis. You're like, yo, listen, I dig what I'm.
No, I'm not trying to piss them off either.
No, I'm just saying you're going to play what you dig it, and you hope they dig it. But even if they don't, you're still going to play it.
Right. That's exactly true.
Right. And that's what aside from turning their backs, those guys were saying, hey, we're getting off on what we're doing, and we dig it, and we hope you do too. Barry, before we wrap, and we're going to have to do an appendage to this as well, but can you share a good story about Hylian? She's really inspiring me lately, and my daughters as well. She was a folkie, and I just wanted you to talk about if you had any collaboration or if you ran into Joni Mitchell at all in your career.
No, my wife knew or knows her, but not me, for whatever reason. Odd, Yeah. There are people who I should know. And for whatever reason, we never got to know each other. And she's one of them. Obviously, from afar, I have a great deal of respect for her. But, I don't know her personally.
I was just going to say, she's an inspiration and dealing with some serious medical issues now. But before I let you go, you just talk about. So you are how long are you going to be at this point in your mind? You are in Paris. You're a free man in Paris with your wife. How long is
and my dog and my cat
and your dog and your cat and is there anything that you want? What are you most mindful of as you continue to inspire on the bandstand, and knowing that in this country that, for no reason other than just that you wanted to do it, you left, but knowing that the circumstances that are going around and quite honestly in the world, what are you trying to stay most mindful of when you are performing and ultimately just carrying yourself as a regular human being?
You know, I'm becoming more and more cognizant of the fact that I am carrying the tradition forward, and it's important to the musical community, as you probably have discovered in this time that you've been doing interviews with members of that community. The music community is almost like a counterculture in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
With values that are lasting and enduring and stand on their own, as an example of perhaps the way people should or could live with each other. There's a great deal of affection in music for the people who play music, for the musical community. It's a community. It's a community that may not have a geographical definition, but it certainly has a political and social border of some kind. I think that sets people in the music community apart from others and inspires them to lead others perhaps into living with more consciousness of their fellow human beings. That's why I was saying, I'm very proud of musicians as a whole and modern musicians for carrying the tradition of social consciousness forward in music. I think it's very much alive in music today. And I see people doing things all the time, and I go, gee, I didn't know that person, was that aware,
Right. Is it easier? Is it easier to carry the tradition on in a more appreciative place for music, for music in general, like Europe? I mean, the black jazzers all moved there. You were talking about the bluesmen who would go over there and have records cut. Is it easier to do that in a non-berserker capitalist society?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this France is a much more open society than the United States. They don't have. I mean, it's not as evident here that social problems are not as evident here as they are in the United States. I think France is handling things in a better way than my own country does. But hey,
can you give a couple examples of what you mean?
French people and in France, it's an easy society to be in. People are. It's a more intimate society where people are more, confident and open with each other. They're doing better than we are.
Yeah.
They're
evolving. They're evolving. Well, yeah, they're evolving more than we are, and maybe they also address some of the same issues that we do in a more humane fashion as well.
Yeah, there's no death penalty in Europe. In the entire continent. You know that, right? They don't have life prison sentences for anybody, hardly. I mean, or they're very rare, All the time in the United States, I used to sit next to young men whose lives were being tossed down the chute, I mean, particularly as a public defender, where young African-American men were sitting next to me, and I was trying to keep the insane criminal justice system from throwing their lives away, completely throwing them away for mistakes they made when they were 19 years old or 18 years old. I mean, because that's how it works in the United States. a criminal sentence, even for a murder case in Europe, 16 years is a long time. They can appreciate how long that. I mean, the average murder case in England, I think, carries a 12 or a 14-year punishment. They think that's pretty horrible. It is pretty horrible.
Right. We're punitive. We're punitive on steroids here. It's insane.
Yeah. And we don't value life the way people do here.
Well, we value. We don't want people to get abortions, so we bring the lives into the world, but then we do nothing to support the people that are having the children. So it's something about a Judeo-Christian foundation there that. Is there a chance that
these people are Judeo-Christian? But they're not as crazy as we are.
It's a Sharia version of Christianity here, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
something like that.
Is there a chance that you will stay in Paris?
Well, not this time. Is there a chance that I may come back here and seriously live here? Absolutely. And it's not only Paris, though. Europe is a far more tolerant place than the United States. Since I've been here, I've been in the Czech Republic, which is a wonderful place. It's a society that was. The modern Czech Republic was founded by a poet who was quite a poet. Vladislav Havel, and in the Czech Republic, we were blown away. They have 5 different kinds of recycling when you go with your garbage. It's not like America where we only have a couple of different kinds of recycling. They have, they recycle everything: cans, bottles, plastic, paper. You have to go and divide your garbage up. What can I say? They have problems, but they're not like the kinds of problems that we have. I was in Greece, and Greece is really suffering economically, as you probably well know.
Yeah.
But it's an incredibly warm, human culture. It's just. They're absorbing the great brunt of the.
You have 1 minute remaining.
They're absorbing the brunt of this great cultural migration that's taking place in our time. And it's pretty impressive society.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time. So they're handling it well, though, as opposed to what the media reports would say.
I think they're handling it well. I think they're handling it as well as could be expected, and they're a humanistic society, and they're decent people.
Barry Melton, I want to have a good send off here. We'll pick this up soon. I always have a ball with you, man. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, Jake. Take care.
Later on.
Yep.
Bye-bye.